Hey there, welcome to my library. In this video, I'm going to do a quick tour of all my books. I have a bit over 200, and you'll find everything from philosophy, theology, and history and beyond. I'll give a brief description of each book and its topics before moving on to the next book. So starting off, I have some medical textbooks on different topics, since I'm about to start my second semester of medical school. I have a bit more back in my apartment, and they aren't the books I read for fun, but they're necessary for my education. They're still in my library since I have to read certain chapters over my winter break, so I brought them here. And we'll return to this bookshelf at the end. I have some philosophy books and some other theology books I would like to discuss as well. So up here we have different translations of the Quran. And I like this one, the Noble Quran, because the amount of commentary it has for each verse in the footnotes. If I can just show you, it has a Hadith. There's some other things right here. Like in general, you can get the gist of that. And I also like the clear Quran right here because of the headings it has that explains like the topic of different like verses. And I also have a Spanish Quran right here and a French Quran. I don't speak any French, but it's just nice to have, I guess. So after that, we have Tafsir Asadi. And it's probably the easiest tafsir to read because of its straightforward language, so I recommend it for beginners like myself and those learning about Islam. And plus it's available in English, which is, a nice plus since I don't know any Arabic. So the first volume, you can see, it has the Arabic and some commentary. And for the entire Quran. Next I have the first volume of Tafsir al-Qurtubi. And it goes from the first chapter of the Quran, Surah Fatiha, to the end of the second chapter, Surah Baqarah. So like I was saying before the video accidentally got cut off, it goes from the first chapter of the Quran, Surah Fatiha, to the end of the second chapter, Surah Baqarah. It's probably the most popular and classical tafsir or commentaries, and talks a lot about legal rulings while also discussing commentary and the elegance and the style of the Quran. Next we have a few more commentaries. This one goes into a lot of non-classical commentaries, so this one talks about different themes of the Quran. Next we have Tafsir Ibn Kathir. It's also a very famous tafsir. I don't have the entire collection as you can see, but I still benefit a lot from it. I use these commentaries as reference for any questions I have of any specific verses. It's loaded with tons of hadith and narrations with the chains of transmissions and about their narrators, and discusses the authenticity and weaknesses of certain hadith. I think every Muslim household should have a good Quranic commentary. And next is lessons learned from Surah Yusuf, which is also by Sheikh Asadi from the Tafsir Asadi. You can see here. I printed it out. I'm just going to put it here for now. And it goes over things such as dream interpretation, how to treat your kids, abstaining from sins, patience, seeking help from God, and explaining verses of the chapter itself. After that, we have the difference between advising and shaming by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. I'll put it here for now. And he talks about the difference between different types of advice, the correct manner of advising, and punishment for shaming others. Next we have Muqaddimah fi Ulum al-Quran. It discusses topics related to the Quran, such as how it was revealed and gathered, the first and last portions of Revelation, Makki and Madni chapters, the 7 modes of recitation, its miraculous nature, the clear and ambiguous verses, abrogation, and the causes of revelation, and the introduction to tafsir. After that, we have an introduction to the sciences of the Quran. And it pretty much goes over similar things found in the previous book. And next we have, I'll put it here. Yeah. And next we have Help Yourself Read the Quran, basically. I think the name kind of tells you what it does. Next we have Jewels of the Quran by Al-Ghazali, and discusses the allegories of the Quran and the hidden meanings found by reading between the lines. And he compares the chapters of the Quran to jewels and other valuable things. After that, we have A Love in the Quran by Prince Ghazi bin Muhammad. And he discusses several verses from several chapters talking about the different types of love, from love of God, love of neighbor, familial love, the stages of falling in love, love between husband and wife, and beauty and aesthetics of creation. So after that, we have The Iron Healing. It's about Surah Hadith, the 57th chapter of the Quran. I like the art on the cover. So it talks about, if I remember correctly, it's a commentary over Surah Hadith, 57th chapter, like I mentioned, and talks about the period of revelation, virtues of the chapter, God's perfection, the afterlife, free will and predestination, and how they relate, and principles of leadership. After that, we have another commentary of the Quran right here. And after that, we have this book I bought in Istanbul, the Quran Unchallengeable Miracle. And it goes over the scientific and numerical miracles of the Quran. Before we go into the hadiths or the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we have this book up here, The Legislative Types of Jihad. There's a lot of misconceptions of what jihad means, and it goes over what it really means in Islam. And he explains the wisdom behind its legislation, its linguistics, the religious meanings, the different rulings and regulations pertaining to, such as who can organize it, which is the leader of a Muslim nation, not some vigilantes or terrorists. And he condemns terrorism in this book. And there's also the jihad of the self, to abstain from your desires, and the jihad of seeking knowledge, where he goes over. What do you hear from him? After that, we have Paragons of the Quran by Ibn al-Qayyim, a student of Ibn Taymiyyah. I haven't read this book in its entirety, but based off what I've read so far and what I've heard about it, he talks about the different themes of the Quran again. And I'll show the table of contents, so since I haven't read too much of it. So after that, we have different hadith collections. And so we're starting with Sahih Bukhari up here. Take it out. So I have the entire thing in one volume with the English and the Arabic. So it's by Imam Bukhari. It's the most authentic book in Islam after the Quran. So we have in one volume, it's a collection of the most authentic, under very rigorous criteria, of the different sayings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It covers everything from worship and morality to social relations and legal rulings. So after that, we have Sahih Muslim, compiled by Imam Muslim. I have it in 7 volumes. It's similar to Sahih Bukhari in that it's a collection of the saying of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And it goes over to various aspects of faith, worship, ethics, and daily life. And it has the English and Arabic. So after that, we have a short commentary on the Bayquniya poem. And it goes over the science of hadith and grading. So how do you know hadith is authentic or not? So like basic terminology and different types of hadith and gradings. After that, we have 3 volumes of Sunan Abi Dawud. It's one of the 6 major hadith collections in Islam, compiled by Imam Abu Dawud. It's a good guide for jurisprudence, helping scholars and individuals understand and implement Islamic rulings. After that, we have Imam Malik's Al-Muwatta. It's a really thick book, over 1,000 pages. What do you say? It's like a navy blue color cover. I really like it. So it has the English and the Arabic with chains of narration of who's transmitting the hadith. And it's unique because it's both a hadith collection and a manual of Islamic law based on the practices of the people of Medina, where Imam Malik lived and taught. and it's a really early Hadith collection, as it's from the 8th century. Next we have Bughal al-Maram by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, a major scholar in Islam. Let's look inside. This example has the English and Arabic, and commentary with the footnotes. So the book focuses on hadith related to Islamic rulings or fiqh, and organized or jurisprudence, organized by topics like purification, prayer, fasting, and transactions, and has notes in the bottom, as you see, on authenticity and how scholars interpret it across different schools of thought. Next, we have Riyadh al-Salihin and a commentary. The cover. It's kind of old, but gets the job done. That's 2 volumes in one. So basically it's a hadith collection focusing on guiding Muslims toward moral excellence in a closer relationship with Allah. And it covers themes like sincerity, patience, gratitude, humility, and the rights of others. And next, what do we have? You can see my excellent binding skills. We have explanation of 40 Hadith by Sheikh Al-Fawzan. So we took a short break because my mom's holding the phone and she got tired. So we left off on the 25th book, I guess. It's Imam Nawawi's 40 Hadith by explanation or commentary by Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan. And the 40 Hadith collection is a concise compilation focusing on the principles of Islam, covering areas like faith, worship, character, and social responsibilities. And his commentary shows how to apply these hadith to your daily life. So let me just flip through it. You can see. And then there's footnotes at the bottom as well. Let's put that back. After that, let's take out these couple of books. It'll be easier for me. We have some books on war hadith. We have right here, I wrote the title by pen. Mustalah Hadith by Sheikh Uthaymin in his commentary over the other poem we just looked at, the Bayquniya poem. This one's way more in depth, way thicker. Just all types of hadith and terminology and things related to that subject in this book as well. Now you can see my highlighting, just examples. I just hold it this way, you can see it better. Here for now. I'll put all my books back eventually. After that, we have The Eminence of the Hadith Adherents by Khatib al-Baghdadi. And it's a work that highlights the virtue of those dedicated to preserving, studying, and teaching the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I really like the yellow cover, and that comes with its own bookmark. You can see I have some highlighting in here as well. Next we have short treatise, The Necessity of Hadith by famous YouTuber Farid al-Bahraini in his book on the necessity of hadith, and he does a great job refuting objections brought up by those who reject hadith. So after that we have a few books on the different madhabs or schools of Islamic thought or jurisprudence, and other books related to fiqh or Islamic jurisprudence. Starting off with the 4 madhabs of Islam, or understand the 4 madhabs. I had another one in here somewhere. Probably, it's right here. 4 madhabs of Islam by Sheikh, let's see, Bewley, and we have Understanding the Four Madhabs by Abdul Hakim Murad. And both books go into why there's four madhabs, how they developed, and how they differ. And after that, we have some Ibn Taymiyyah, 2 books. For now, there's a lot of Ibn Taymiyyah in my collection. The Removal of Blame from the Great Imams by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. And let's see, am I highlighting there? And this book goes over why a scholar might depart from directly acting upon a hadith and follow his methodological principles instead, according to his madhab. And it also addresses criticisms and misconceptions directed at the 4 imams. And perhaps a scholar didn't know about a hadith, or had a different interpretation, or didn't believe the hadith was authentic, or he thinks it applies to a specific situation instead of a general situation. And other excuses for the scholars as well. They're only trying their best, they're only human after all. I have to do some quick editing there, but next is another book by Ibn Taymiyyah called The Medinan Way. The soundness of the basic premise of the school of the people of Medina. So while Ibn Taymiyyah himself was a Hanbali jurist, in this book he discusses the value of the consensus of the people of Medina and its standing as evidence and authority in practice of their sunnah, or the way they acted. It goes here, up there. And we have some books on more of fiqh, or Islamic jurisprudence. We have Al-Warakat in Usul al-Fiqh. And after that we have Foundations of Usul by Sheikh Uthaymeen. And both go into types of speech, general versus specific, methods of interpretation, consensus, analogy, and evidences. So basically, how to derive Islamic law. Put these 2 back. So after that we have an introduction to the Hanbali madhab. I haven't read this one yet, it's quite dense, but it goes into the legal theories of the Hanbali madhab, and I'll show the table of contents. So next is Imam al-Shafi's Risala. It's a foundational book in the text of Usul al-Fiqh. Like other books, it outlines the methodology for deriving legal rulings from the Quran and Hadith. It also talks about consensus, or ijma, or analogy, qiyas. And Imam al-Shafi was probably the first person to systematically categorize sources of Islamic law. Let's open it up and show you around. Where's my bookmark? Go back to that bookmark. The chess puzzle, if you'd like to solve it. Let's see up here what we have. English word dictionary. Yeah, I like to read dictionaries for fun. No. So after that we have Fiqh as-Sunnah by I think it was what's his name? And by Sayyid Sabiq, and they go under rules of purity, prayer, and charity. I think in total it's supposed to be 5 volumes, but I have 3. So after that we have another book on Islamic purity and prayer. This one also has funeral rites, but it's from the Hanafi madhab instead. Let's see, I have some books here as well up top that I printed out. So we have Fiqh Made Easy, and other book I have is Bidayat al-Abid, and both go over things such as purity of like types of water and what is considered impure, how to purify oneself, how to pray by yourself or in a congregation, voluntary prayers, the Friday prayer, funeral prayers, like how to give charity, how to fast, basically Islam 101, how to, make pilgrimage or business transactions. Let's put it here for now. So after that, what do we have? We have The Prophet's Prayer Described by Sheikh Albani, and it goes over how to pray in Islam. And after that, we have a book on how to perform Hajj or Umrah, the major and minor pilgrimages in Islam. After that, we have 2 volumes of Minhaj al-Muslim, and it goes over how Muslims should act. It's a book of creed, manners, character, act of worship, and other deeds, as it says right here. And this goes over etiquette, good character, justice, and fiqh-related issues. And it's in 2 volumes, English and Arabic. And after that, we're going into the books of seerah, or the life of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This is probably the oldest book I have in my collection. It's from 1964, but I think I have a book from like the 1950s down there, but we're not there yet. And so I have this beautiful book. Take it out of the cover. You can see like the shine on it. And this is Seerah Ibn Ishaq, probably the earliest Seerah, second earliest. I think they discovered a new one. We have Seerah Ibn Hisham as well. Next we have the famous sealed nectar, which I have printed out and bound myself. Next we have Martin Ling's Seerah book. Next we have Juan Cole. Next we have probably my favorites, or one of my favorites. It's called A Biography of the Prophet of Islam. I don't have the first edition on me right now, but in my opinion, it's probably the most authentic biography available in English. It goes over all aspects of his life and provides several sources and commentary in the footnotes. If you can open it up, this is just the second volume. This is full of footnotes explaining where they got their sources from. You can see. Next is another book I really enjoyed, The Leadership of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam by Joel Hayward. I think it's Australian, New Zealand, one of those, close enough. And it goes over how Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a person, a leader of the community, a leader of an army, how he was as a diplomat, how he led by example and maximized the human potential in his followers. Next we have another fiqh book by Imam Nawawi. Next we have Shamil al-Tirmidhi by Imam al-Tirmidhi. And it's basically descriptions of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, like how he looked, how he acted, how he dressed, slept, ate, walked, wept, all those. Here's one of my grandma's books. It's in Urdu, so I don't know. Have that balanced. And next we have Misquoting Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam by Jonathan A.C. Brown. This book, let me show you the cover. So this book basically lays out how Muslim scholars have tried to balance reason, revelation, science, and religion, and negotiate the eternal truths of Scripture amid the shifting values in our liberal and secular society. And I have some more, another seerah book. This one also by Sheikh Al-Fawzan. And another one right here. It's found just like outside a mosque. Next, I have another book by that YouTuber, Shriya Bahrani, but I haven't read this one. Reading books, and it's upside down. Reading books as a hobby and collecting books, they're similar, but they have quite a lot of differences. And this is about the martyrdom of Al-Hussein. So it's what I know about this book. It's a historical account of the events leading up to Karbala. After this, we have... Let me just move this off to the side so it doesn't fall by accident. After that, we have just a book that covers the different lives of the different companions or disciples of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I have a book on the life of different prophets, and I also bought this one in Turkey, in Istanbul. And it starts from all the way from Prophet Adam alayhi salam, ending with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Next, we have some books like introductory book to Islam. And after that, we have Islam and the Destiny of Man by Guy Eaton. And it's really hard to put this book into words, but it goes into what it means to be a Muslim in the modern world. It's an exploration of the spiritual and philosophical aspects of Islam. It discusses the core beliefs of Islam in a way that's accessible to both Muslims and non-Muslims alike. It talks about the points of faith, spiritual discipline, and then understanding Islam not just as a religion, but a complete way of life and how we can align ourselves with God's will. And a bunch of some other books, random. Let's see, some random books I found by the mosque. So next we're just moving on to books of Islamic creed and belief, starting with we're still just books about starting with the importance of learning the creed. And it's short, but it's really important because, in my opinion, the science of Islamic creed is the most noble of all the sciences, since the believer needs to understand greater than all other knowledges. Because you can't have a happy life or a successful life until they know your Creator and the true deity that all worship belongs to. Next we have Al-Muzani's Sharh as-Sunnah, or explanation of the Sunnah. It goes over subjects such as the ascendancy of Allah, predestination, angels, Adam, paradise and hellfire, faith, the Quran, attributes of Allah, the appointed times of death, day of resurrection, and reckoning. That's the one we already looked at. Another book on Islamic creed. It's similar to the previous book, but it's in more detail. It's two books or one? It's two. Take out both of them. Just going over this one first. The correct Islamic aqeedah, or creed, and that which opposes it, by Sheikh Ibn Baz. And also have Introduction to Fatwa Hamawiyya by Ibn Taymiyyah. I recommend both books. Now we're moving down here, so let's just pause the video. So next we have The Foundations of the Sunnah by Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. The famous Hanbali scholars founded the Hanbali madhab way. And it goes into the attributes of Allah, the correct understanding, meaning that we take their apparent meaning without distorting them or asking how. It talks about some metaphysics and refutations of the Ash'ari aqeedah. But I'm not going to put it here. I'll just put it here for now. I'll put it back. And we have some other books that haven't fully, maybe I did bound them, but not as tight as they should be. And next we have the first aqeedah book I ever read, an explanation of Imam Ahmad's Foundation of the Sunnah. So it's a commentary on the previous book we just looked at by Sheikh Rabi al-Madkhali. So it's a commentary of the book we just read, and it goes into other topics such as the speech of Allah and how it's not created, and the belief in Allah that He will be seen in the hereafter. It also discusses the punishment of the grave, the appearance of the Dajjal or the Antichrist, and the descending of Isa alayhi salam or Jesus Christ. Next we have the Creed of Wasatiyah by Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and it's similar to the last book, but it goes in more of the metaphysical side of Allah's attributes. Next we have Kitab al-Sunnah by Abdullah ibn Ahmad, or Imam Ahmad's son. And so it's basically like a long refutation of deviant groups like the Jamia, who deny almost all of Allah's attributes. I'll open the book, as you can see, it has English and Arabic, and several chains of narration, quotes. You can see my highlighting on the next page. Yeah. Next we have some other books on aqeedah. We have Numat al-I'tiqad by Ibn Qudama. We have the summary of the Hanbali Creed or the Athari Creed. We have salvation of the successors and belief of the predecessors. And we have an authentic summary of the Prophet's prayer, and that should be in the fiqh section right here. Here it is. And after that we have the pillars of Islam and Iman, what every Muslim should know about his religion, his or her religion. And it's basically just like another Islam 101 book. After that, we have a commentary or an explanation of Aqeedah al-Wasatiyah by Ibn Taymiyyah. So just a commentary on the book we previously mentioned. Next we have a really big commentary, a 2-volume commentary on that same book. And it's by Sheikh Uthaymeen again. And I would recommend this book to anyone trying to learn Islamic creed. And it pretty much goes over everything you have to know. And I'll show the table of contents of both volumes. Like the goldness of pages. So next we have another book by Ghazali, The 99 Beautiful Names of God. And with Ghazali, you always have something spiritual or mystical, and this doesn't disappoint. Next we have Kitab al-Tawheed by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. And it's another standard book for like students who are trying to learn Islamic creed. And Tawheed meaning monotheism, which is a key doctrine of Islam. And it explains all the relevant verses regarding monotheism from the Quran, and explains them in an easy to understand fashion. Next we have this thick book. An explanation of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab's Removal of Doubts by Sheikh Uthaymeen again. And you're probably seeing a common trend with authors about now. And I haven't read this one either. Well, I read the previous ones. But I'll show you the table of contents so you can get a gist of what it's about. need to bind this one as well. Come on. Gotta lick the page. After that, we have the names and attributes of Allah. He goes into the doctrine of the meanings of his names. What are his names? How do we know what his names are? And Hadith and Quran verses that mention his name. It also goes to names that are not permissible to call Allah. And some metaphysics on how his names relate to his essence. And the correct understanding of his names. And a refutation of deviant groups who misinterpret the attributes of Allah. And he also gives a lot of quotes of major scholars, such as Ibn Taymiyyah, as evidence. Next we have an explanation of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab's 4 principles of shirk. And this book goes over it goes over like the differences between like monotheism versus polytheism, basically. Next we have an explanation of the 6 principles of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab by Sheikh Al-Fawzan again. And it's basically another basic aqeedah or creedal manual. It goes over the importance of sincerity of the believer, to have monotheism in his or her heart when worshiping God, to avoid sectarianism, to follow the rulers, to follow the scholars, and who the friends of God are, and the responsibility of everyone to seek knowledge. Next we have one of my favorite books. Only probably like an eighth through it. I'm really enjoying it. Back when I had time to read it. It's Ibn Taymiyyah expounds on Islam, selected writings of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, and on Islamic faith, life, and society. It's quite a thick book. It's pretty much Islam 101. Everything you need to know is found in here. And it goes really deep on 3 metaphysics, the fitra, or the natural disposition of man, theology, sociology, terminology, society, government, the Prophet's Quran family. And I recommend this book to anyone who's seriously learning about Islam or Ibn Taymiyyah. Next we have the Book of the End, Great Trials and Tribulations by Ibn Kathir, a student of Ibn Taymiyyah along with Ibn Qayyim. This is the same Ibn Kathir who wrote Tafsir Ibn Kathir mentioned earlier. I haven't finished this one, but it goes into details of prophecies and signs of the Day of Judgment, what will happen on that day in terms of events. It talks about Dajjal or Antichrist and about Isa ibn Maryam, or the Jesus son of Mary, and gives descriptions of paradise and hell. Next we have Imam Abu Hanifa's Fiqh al-Akbar explained. I really like this cover. It has its own bookmark as well. And let's look at the inside as well. I like the design. And I would argue that Abu Hanifa himself followed an authentic creed. And same with all the pious predecessors in the Salaf, or the 3 righteous generations. But the commentary has some Maturidi undertones, and Maturidi is just another school of the Islamic creed, along with like Asharis and Atharis. As you can see, I still need to bind a bunch of my books. I guess I don't know, take them out once. Oh yeah. Let's see. Just gonna start with this one. I haven't read this one either, but it's a commentary on the Creed of Imam Tahawi by Sheikh Fawzan again. So I'll show the table of contents since I haven't read it. aside. After that, we have something that is bound. An answer regarding swearing by other than Allah and prayer towards the graves by Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah again. And obviously, whomever swears by other than God has committed idolatry, which is the worst of sins. After that, we have things that nullify one's Islam by Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and explained by Sheikh Fawzan again. And it goes over things that take someone out of the fold of Islam, such as idolatry, or not declaring the polytheists to be disbelievers, hating something that's found in Islam, mocking the religion, or magic, or etc. After that, we have the resurrection, a summary of events to occur by Sheikh Uthaymeen again. And it goes into things such as souls returning to their bodies, or mankind arising from their graves, or the intercession or weighing of deeds on the scales, judgment, crossing the bridge, entering paradise and seeing your Lord in heaven. Next we have Ibn Taymiyyah's Essay on the Jinn by Dr. Bilal Phillips. So explains who the jinn are, basically demons, and possession, exorcism, things of the like. Next we have another cradle book by Ibn Taymiyyah. After that we have The Soul's Journey After Death by Ibn al-Qayyim. Then we have some more creedal books. Logical Proofs for the Oneness and Perfection of Allah. This one I stapled together. The Conditions of La ilaha illallah, or that there's no deity worthy of worship besides Allah. So the conditions would be you must have knowledge of its meaning, negation and affirmation. You have knowledge that counteracts suspicion. You must have sincerity, truthfulness, love for the statement, submission to its requirements, and acceptance. Next we have Where is Allah? And everyone knows it's above the heavens and the earth. Next we have the Book of Major Sins, such as, what is idolatry, pride, vanity, hypocrisy, despair, and God's mercy. Evil of the tongue, such as lying, slandering a chaste woman, cursing a believer, racism, murder, adultery, bribery, etc. Goes into all of those. You have to know what they are so we can avoid them. Next we have Ibn Taymiyyah's Theology of Perpetual Optimism by John Hoover. And it goes over Ibn Taymiyyah's view on God, metaphysics, free will, and solving the problem of evil. Next we have Ibn Taymiyyah on reason and revelation. And it goes over what is reason, what is revelation, and Ibn Taymiyyah's position that true reason and true revelation can never contradict. Next we have Dr. Zeni's Ibn Taymiyyah on causality and reliance on God. And it really goes deep into the metaphysics of prayer, free will, and how that relates to human action. I'll put it here. After that, we have Ibn Taymiyyah on the oneness of God, and it's a really in-depth logical refutation of all systems of polytheism. After that, we have a book I really need to read again. It's Between the God of the Prophets and the God of the Philosophers by Hatim al-Hajj, a reflection of an Athari, divine attributes. So it goes deep into through metaphysics, and it contrasts it with Aristotelian metaphysics. And on my blog page, I have a few articles going in depth on the same topics. And in my understanding of other metaphysics, God is the one, the singular, who has no peers and rivals. His attributes subsist and inhere in him and cannot be separated from him. In other words, the attributes of God, or Allah, are not identical to him nor other than him. His attributes are not created, and they subsist in his essence. And his essence is not dependent on independent attributes. Rather, attributes depend on his essence, in the sense that God's attributes subsist in his essence, and they cannot be separated from him. The dependence upon his attributes and his essence is not a causal dependence, otherwise they would be created, but rather it's a counterfactual dependence. This existence of two things is a condition for the other thing, that they must go together. Such as, if there's a part, it must be a whole, or if you have a three-sided object, it must be a triangle. It's a definitional thing. And God's acts is an attribute that is acting and subsists in its essence, and therefore the effect of that act is distinct from the action, as the effect is creation itself. As for his attributes, his act of speaking is tied to his will and his power, as God chooses to speak by his will. And it's important to mention that the way God hears is unlike the way we hear things, but the plain meaning is affirmed and is the analogy predicated of God. Also, the Quran is uncreated and was revealed in time, and God is dynamic and not static like the God of the philosophers. His attributes are not divided by space or time, and therefore distinguished by identity. The attributes of God are real and affirmed in the text based off the understanding of the pious predecessors, and this inherent meaning takes into the entire corpus of revelation to context. Furthermore, when it's said that God exists and his creations exist, the sharing of the universal of existence is again not anthropomorphizing, lest there's an assumed realism. The assumed realism states that God and his creation both have, for example, knowledge, and this universal knowledge must be partially identical in God and man. However, if realism is rejected in favor of nominalism or conceptualism, the objection falls and there's no ontological sharing, as ontological sharing doesn't exist. I think I spoke enough about that book. Next we have to the metaphysics of Islam. And like Kant, you really need a PhD to even understand this book. It went like 99% over my head. And it goes over like psychology, the intuition of existence, quiddity, essence, ontology, the necessary versus contingent, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth degrees of existence. I don't even know what that means, and I can't even begin to explain it. I got two more books here before we go to the next bookshelf. We have Islamic Philosophy and Theology by the last of the great Western Orientalist, Montgomery Watt. And it goes over the beginnings of sectarianism with the Khawarij and the Shia, and the influence of Hellenism on the Asharis and the Mutazilites, and an in-depth view of Ghazali. And it also talks about Atherism, Mathurides, and a lot more about the Shia and their schools of theology and the impact of the West on Islamic thought. And last book at the bottom, we have The Merits of Islam by Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab again. I haven't read this one, but I probably read like 80% of my books. I went on a grind before medical school because I knew my free time would just diminish. So now we're going to go to the next bookshelf up there. So moving on to the next bookshelf, we have The Preaching of Islam. I haven't read this one yet, but based off the name, it goes over the spread of Islam throughout history. And I'll show you the table of contents. Previous page. After that, we have some books on apologetics, as every Muslim needs to know how to defend his or her faith. So first, we have The Choice by Ahmad. Next, we have The Crucifixion of Jesus by Louis Fatui, and it compares like the contradictions of the gospel accounts regarding the crucifixion and resurrection. It looks at the unreliability of early sources like Josephus and other Jewish sources, and the Islamic position on the crucifixion. Next, we have Divine Perfection Christianity and Islam on salvation. And it goes over what is salvation according to both religions and how the Islamic conception is more just, and refutation of Dr. William Lane Craig's arguments against the Islamic position of salvation. Next we have Misguided and Guided by Dr. Lawrence B. Brown. The former compares Islamic Christianity, and the latter provides evidence for the truthfulness of Islam, such as proofs of prophethood, the miracles of the Quran, etc. After that we have the Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun, and whom many consider to be the father of sociology, economics, and historiography. I haven't read it, but based off what I know about it, it goes over the fall of civilizations, going over themes like social cohesion, economics, politics, and the role of the environment in shaping societies. It's one of the classic books that people should read, especially if they're interested in sociology. Next we have the Travels of Ibn Battuta, and I started it, but I didn't get far into it. But it goes over his travels over 75,000 miles and getting as far as Volga and as east as China and as south as Tanzania. And you get a first-hand perspective on society, people, and the cultures of all the countries he visited during the 14th century. In a way, it's like a time machine, but then again, so are all these books discussed so far. And after that, we have Ibn Taymiyyah by John Hoover. And we spoke a lot about Ibn Taymiyyah so far, but it's just another book about his philosophy and overview of his life. The next is another apologetics book, Answering Those Who Alter the Religion of Jesus Christ by Ibn Taymiyyah again. Let's put this one up here for now. And he refutes common Christian arguments against Islam, some of which are still used today. He makes arguments against the Trinity using logical proofs and proofs for the prophethood of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Next we have a few more books on apologetics. After that we have Rethinking Islam in the West by Ahmed Paul Keeler. And it's been a while since I read it, but the book discussed the relationship between Islam and the West in terms of balance achieved between the spiritual, social, and material needs of humanity. And balance was a really key theme in this book that was repeated over and over again. After that, we have The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam by Allama Iqbal. And this book is really deep in depth. A lot of it went over my head. I've started it, but I didn't really get through it that much. It's too advanced for me in the terms of philosophy and the technical writing skills. But knowing Iqbal, it's probably about the intellectual and spiritual renewal in Islam while staying rooted in tradition, and how the thought of Islam can be revitalized in the modern age, and probably addresses the challenges posted by Western philosophy and colonialism. I also have his PhD thesis somewhere in the library. I don't know where I put it, but we'll probably find it eventually. After that, we have The Refinement of Character by Ibn Qudama. We have a couple books by him we mentioned so far. And this book goes over just the fundamentals of etiquette, and it's based off the teachings of Islam. After that, we have the second volume of Al-Ghazali's The Alchemy of Happiness. I haven't read it yet, so I'll show the table of contents as well. So after that, just more books on the spiritual side. You have Characteristics of the Hypocrites by Ibn Qayyim. Next is a book on overcoming nihilism. After that, we have The Inner Worships of Islam by Ghazali, somewhere in here, right here. After that, we have just books on spiritualism. I like the Al-Ghazali one, but it's just full of weak hadith. You can see my just highlighting through it and just notes I took. Yeah. I would still recommend it though. Still a good read. And this book's on the Inner Dimensions of Prayer by the same author, Ibn al-Qayyim. And another book by him on patience and gratitude. Next we have a book by Ibn Arabi, The Four Pillars of Spiritual Transformation. I wouldn't recommend this book. I can see why a lot of Islamic scholars declared him to be an apostate, but that's besides the point. After that we have The Benefit of Fearing Allah by Sheikh Uthaymeen again. After that we have The Excellence of Knowledge by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. After that we have some poetry by Allama Iqbal. After that we have some more Ibn Taymiyyah. We have The Diseases of the Heart and Their Cure. We have The Principles of Patience. And we have Being a True Slave of Allah, all by Ibn Taymiyyah. Next we have The Journey of the Strangers by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali again. Let's see. Next we have like a book on like the hypocrites. Now we have a book on like controlling the self, or controlling of your desires, things of that nature. Next we have like a book on faith. After that we have a book on pleasing Allah or God. And after that we have a book on Tawassul by Albani. And Tawassul means like, being near to God, or means of being near to God. After that we have a book on like good deeds and bad deeds by Ibn Qudama again. And it's probably the last Islamic book, because after that we just have books on learning Arabic, the Medina books. But obviously I need a teacher for that. So if you know anyone, let me know. So after that we're starting the philosophical section of my library. We're done with Islamic theology for now. And we have some books on proving the existence of God. The first of which is the Kalam Cosmological Arguments by Muhammad Hijab. And the Kalam Cosmological Argument is, the premises are: premise number 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. So in this book, Muhammad Hijab explains Ibn Sina's, Ghazali's, and Ibn Taymiyyah's version of the arguments. And at the end of the day, all cosmological arguments and contingency arguments provide, or really they divide existence into possible and necessary, and using possible existences to prove a necessary existence, as possible things ultimately require a necessary thing in order to prove its existence. And if you have, that, then obviously there must be a necessary being. And if it's necessary, then it must exist in all possibilities. Now on my blog, I have several articles dedicated to proving the existence of God through similar arguments if you're interested. And after that, we have the Kalam Cosmological Arguments by Dr. William Lane Craig. And this is a really deep book. It's very high level. And it begins with a survey of the argument. It provides arguments for the premises that I just mentioned, in conclusion through mathematical, scientific, and philosophical grounds, while refuting counter arguments against it. I recommend that Muhammad Hijab one for a basic overview of the arguments, while the Craig one is one for more seriously interested in the topic and going in depth in it. After that, we have the Burhan Arguments for a Necessary Being, inspired by Islamic thought by Muhammad Hijab again. And he gives both arguments, cosmological and ontological, through Ibn Sina, Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, Aquinas, Duns Scotus, so the Catholic tradition, and Ibn Taymiyyah again. And also modern scholars like Craig, who we just looked at a couple times, and Plantinga. And he also gives his own version of the argument that synthesizes the previous mentioned scholars. And last year refutes counter-arguments given by atheists like Bertrand Russell or Lawrence Krauss. After that, we have Meyer's Return of the God Hypothesis. It's quite a big book, but I haven't read it yet. And I'll show the table of contents, where the book provides, or attempts to provide scientific arguments for the existence of God. This is another book I bought in England, the Oxford Companion to Philosophy. And I use it as a reference and tool whenever writing my blog posts, and it goes for pretty much every major philosopher and philosophical movements, and has a bunch of really nice tables and charts in the back, and I'll show you. I take out my receipt. It's got a thick book, heavy. Let's see, yes. A lot of information. So Sartre, we got Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Hume. We're gonna talk about them in depth later. I'll show you the charts that it has, if I can find it. There's a whole index in the back. Here's some charts. There's a chronological timeline of philosophy. More charts, empiricism, rationalism, which we'll talk about later, metaphysics, realism, logical and philosophical logic. Philosophical language, just like pretty much everything. Next we have a book by Keith Ward, if I can fit this in. That's what she said. It's called The Priority of the Mind, and asks, is the mind created by the brain, or does the mind create reality? In this short book, it argues the latter, that the mind is prior to matter. After that, we have a book I bought in Turkey. It's called The Medieval Religious Conquests, Comparative Analysis of India and Scandinavia. And it's pretty well, it's heavily researched. I like it. Right here. After that, we have The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism by Max Weber. It's also another classic book that everyone should read. And the book argues that the rise of capitalism is due to the Protestant belief in the moral value of hard work and the fulfillment of one's worldly duties. Because generally, according to Weber, our religious devotion inhibits the pursuit of wealth, but the Reformation flipped that on its head completely and made one calling sacred, such that workers became extremely devoted to their crafts, and therefore societies having more Protestants are those that have more developed capitalist economies. And next we have some history books that I haven't read. I think they belong to my cousin. And next we have A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khalid Hosseini. I read it a long time ago. Now I don't remember what any of it's about. Next we got another classic, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, or Geist. You really need a big brain to understand this, and I don't understand it. It's very impossible to read. I think that's why Schopenhauer didn't like him. But I also have the Cambridge Companion to Hegel right here. So if I have any questions while reading it, and I'll just do a brief overview of Hegel since I'm kind of familiar with him. Because luckily for you, I've written a few blog posts about him in order to attempt to break Hegel's philosophy down into simple language. And in this book, The Phenomenology of Spirits, Hegel develops his own concepts of the dialectic, including something famous like the Lord Bondsman dialectic or the Slave Master dialectic, which I have a whole article dedicated to. He also talks about like absolute realism, the dialectic of the movement of history pushing forward by the Geist of the absolute spirit, and it's moving forwards, like going through intermediate, immediate, concrete, or people say a thesis, antithesis, synthesis towards the absolute. Like in Hegelian dialectics, the concept contains its own negation, and by overcoming it, it can become more concrete. Concepts are inherently incomplete, such that contradictions arise to develop it further. And the last state of the dialectical process is known as the absolute, and the process begins at the moment of self-realizations in the human consciousness that is known through the negation of the otherness. And that's the slave-master dialectic, which is briefly that two consciousness engage in a struggle for recognition, which is a fundamental aspect of the development of the self-consciousness itself as individuals, and individuals involved to seek acknowledgement from the other. So the asymmetry in the power between the two consciousness becomes a source of tension, driving the dialectical movement towards resolution. Hegel really talks about how the fear of death shapes the interactions between the slave and the master. Through the conflict and resolution in the slave-master relationship, consciousness undergoes a transformation. And the outcome of the struggle is the establishment of a slave-master relationship. The master is one who asserts dominance and imposes their will, while the slave submits to the master's authority. This relationship, however, is not stable and contains inherent contradictions. The master asserts his dominance, and the slave voluntarily submits to avoid the fear of death, which creates a fragile foundation, like I mentioned. And the master's recognition is contingent on the slave's submission, and the slave's recognition is based on dependency, but in doing so, the master limits the potential for genuine recognition and freedom. And the tension and instability within the master-slave relationship becomes a catalyst for the ongoing development of self-consciousness, whereas the slave recognizes their creative potential. A sense of independence and individuality emerges, challenging the initial asymmetry of the slave-master relationship. And as the power dynamic shifts, the slave gains a form of mastery over their selfhood, and Hegel suggests that this initial asymmetry breaks down the slave's independence and challenges, or builds up the slave's independence and challenges the master's dominance. The ultimate goal of the dialectical process in the slave-master relationship is the achievement of mutual recognition. Both the master and slave needs recognition from the other to validate their own self-consciousness. This mutual recognition is key towards the development of one's own true self-consciousness. Therefore, freedom is not only simply self-autonomy, but involves the recognition and acknowledgement of others. And I think I've said enough about that. So next we're moving on to Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. And we also have the Cambridge companion to Heidegger. So we have his Being in Time. And I think the Being in Time is the next stage, big step in philosophy after Hegel. And the book basically talks about how subject... What are you doing? Yeah, you can see the book. Got a picture of Heidegger. I think he was a Nazi, but that's besides the point. I'll get the book back. Being in Time. So the book talks about how subject and object are inseparable to the concept of, I don't want to pronounce German, but Dasein, or the being in the world. And the concept of Dasein is a key concept of being, which proceeds in a logical way. Heidegger explores concepts like morality and its relationship with the Dasein. He also examines everyday experiences such as work or moods and social interactions, angst, to cover the underlying structures of existence, and he delves deeper into the nature of time and its relationship to being, and how death is what gives time value. Next we have the Cambridge companion to Sartre, and I haven't really read much of him, but he follows in the footsteps of the existential philosophers, and that humans are not born with a predetermined purpose or essence. Instead, we create our own essence through our choices and actions, and that we're condemned to be free because of the consequences of our actions. Next, we have 2 books on human nature that I need for 2 classes during undergrad. I'll show them real quick. Table of contents. Up here for now, in the second book. So after that we have, so up here we have 2 books one book by Ghazali, one by Ibn Taymiyyah, and the refutation of the philosophers like Aristotle, and in particular Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi. Forget to get them out. Oh, that wasn't supposed to fall. Well, that was Ibn Taymiyyah's book that fell. And we have the Incoherence of the Philosophers by Ghazali. And it's a pretty famous classic book. And there's my bookmark. Hope you like it. Put up here. After that, we have Bertrand Russell, History of Western Philosophy. It's a survey of Western philosophy from the pre-Socratics to the early 20th century. About in England. After that, we have Time and Eternity by Dr. William Lane Craig. We have the second book by him, Cosmological Argument, that we went over previously. And just the main gist of Craig's argument in this book is that God is eternal and timeless before creation, but has a temporal dimension with respect to creation, like once he created. After that, we have my favorite philosopher of all time, Immanuel Kant. We have his 3 critiques. We have his groundwork on the metaphysics of morals, and we have the Cambridge Companion to Kant. So, first critique, the critique of pure reason up here, critique of practical reason, the critique of judgments. And I spent like 20 minutes talking about Hegel. I'm going to do the same thing for Kant. On my blog, I have like 20 articles going in depth on Kantian metaphysics and morality if you're interested in learning more about him. I'll give a brief introduction to his metaphysics, also known as transcendental idealism, before we move on to Schopenhauer, which is, I would say, the successor to Kant. But in Kantian philosophy, the noumena, or the thing in itself, represents the ultimate reality of objects independent to our perceptions. And Kant argued that we can never have direct knowledge of the noumenal realm because our knowledge is necessarily mediated through the structures of our mind and our senses. Our experiences are shaped by 12 categories of understanding, and the forms of intuition and these mental structures impose limitations on what we can know about the underlying reality. It is our understanding that prescribes the laws of causality, space and time, which he calls the transcendental aesthetic. And however, because we can't know anything prior to the mind receiving information about the noumenal world, I think like analogy for this is like a projector. The mind is a projector, and information that comes into the projector, perhaps a file, is the noumena, and it gives the file gives information about what's going to be projected. It projects things onto the screen of experience. One can know something a priori or beforehand about the thing that is projected by knowing something about the projector. For example, if we know the projector is only black and white, then we know a priori that the projection will be black and white. But just knowing the information about the projector and the things on the screen, what can we say about the file itself? There's no guarantee that the file itself obeys the laws of the projector. For example, just because the projector is black and white, as previously mentioned, doesn't mean that the file itself is black and white or has any color at all. It could be all zeros and ones. And there's no guarantee that what's projected in the file is projected similar to the file. To know about the projector is the synthetic a priori that Kant was looking for and that Hume denied. We'll go talk about Hume later. But that was pretty much all of his metaphysical philosophy. But his moral philosophy can be summarized with one statement. He has different formulations of the categorical imperative, but the most famous one is, if I can remember it properly, it's act on that maxim through which at the same time will that it should be a universal law. And I'll let you think about that. So moving on to Schopenhauer, Arthur Schopenhauer, you can see he looks very happy. He further develops Kantian philosophy into the world of pessimism. Like, why is life so bad? And according to Schopenhauer, it's because everything is a manifestation of the noumena, which he identifies as the will. And it's a mindless force that powers through everything in the universe. And it's a blind force that drives all our instincts and desires. And this forces humans to suffer in the pursuit of new things. And however, it has no ultimate goal or purpose, so it can never be satisfied. And getting what we want temporarily relieves the pain, but as long as before we get bored and the thirst returns. So we know once we have love, we want more love. Once we have money, we want more money, more status, and so we begin to suffer again. And this similar thing is like suffering that is said to be in Buddhism, the suffering of the material world. And happiness is a moment that we're free or distracted away from our sufferings, but it's only short-lived. And after that, we have the complete works of Michelangelo, the artist. It's just like pictures and stuff. After that, we have some random book I haven't read. And after that, we have some more classics. We got the Count of Monte Cristo, the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer Simpson. We have Hesiod and Theogons. We have some Dostoevsky here. We got Tolstoy. And another Tolstoy book. We have Faulkner and this other book I read a while back. I think it was like in high school when I read this. I don't remember what it's about. But so the Monte Cristo, it's like this dude, Dantes, is like wrongfully imprisoned due to jealousy of his like so-called friends. And after escaping from prison and discovering a hidden treasure, he assumes the identity of the Count of Monte Cristo and tries to seek revenge on those who betrayed him. And we have the Iliad and the Odyssey. And the Iliad is an epic poem by Homer that recounts the events of the Trojan War, focusing on the hero Achilles and his conflict with King Agamemnon. After that, we have the Odyssey. It follows the fall of Troy, and Odysseus embarks on like a 10-year journey to his home. And he has various obstacles he encounters along the way, like Cyclops, sirens, and yeah. Next, we have Hesiod's Theology, and it details the origin and genealogy of the gods, starting from the creation of the universe. And it has different poems that talk about the morality and politics and the personal conduction of in ancient Greece. Conduct, not conduction. Next, we have the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and it really talks about the tumultuous, in a way, the relationship between the Karamazov family. And Crime and Punishment, we have this follows this dude who kills an old lady, and he's it's about his psychological turmoil, the moral dilemma this guy goes through, and the guilt he's grappling with, and paranoia. And War and Peace, Tolstoy follows some aristocratic families in Russia during the Napoleonic Wars. As I Lay Dying, William Faulkner follows the family journey to fill their I think it was their mom or something, her wish to be buried in her hometown. And the death of Ivan Ilyich, I think I'm pronouncing that right. So he's a high-ranking judge, and he's dying, and it's just him reflecting on the superficiality of his life. And before we go into the Christianity portion, I have some other books of philosophy and theology I want to get through first, so let's just pause the video for now. Okay, so first we have the Ramayana by Valmiki, and it's so we're starting with Hinduism here. So it's about the life of the prince Rama, who is the avatar of their god Vishnu, and he was wrongfully exiled to the forest for 14 years, and he was accompanied by his wife Sita and his loyal brother Lakshman. And during their exile, Sita is abducted by the demon king Ravana, and it leads to an epic battle between Ravana and the help of monkeys and bears, and ultimately defeats Ravana and rescues Sita. The monkey, what's his name? Hanuman, yeah. And it's a nice story. It's probably the longest book I've ever read. It's 1,000 pages. And after reading that, all the other books feel short to me. After that, we have the Upanishads, it's the English translation of it. And it expounds upon the concepts of Brahman, the ultimate reality, Atman, the individual soul, and how they're identical, and how this life in reality is an illusion. How Brahman is the only true reality. You just have to realize it. And then it explores concepts like karma, action and consequences, samsara, the cycle of rebirth, and moksha, the liberation from the cycle of rebirth. After that, we have the Code of Manu, also known as the Manusmriti. I think I said that right. Manu, yeah. And then it's an ancient Hindu text that outlines the laws and the social norms of ancient India society. And it covers aspects of life varnas, or the caste system, and the stages of life and responsibilities of individuals within a family. And it's pretty sexist, but you can hear that from me. After that, we have the Ramayana, stories in modern South India. And it's about how different people in South India view the book that we mentioned previously, and how they come up with their own interpretations and their own alternate stories and alternate endings, and how the Ramayana has impacted their worldviews. And it's kind of how South India reflects upon it, and whether they disagree or agree with the ideas found in it. Next, we have the Gita Bhashya by Ramanuja, one of the most important philosophers in Hinduism. He came up with the idea of Vishishtha Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualistic philosophy that also recognizes Brahman as the supreme reality, while also acknowledging the multiplicity. So it's a qualified monism. And this is in contrast to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, which is the classical non-dualism no one thinks of. And this book is Ramanuja's commentary of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a famous portion of a larger text known as the Mahabharata. And the Gita is a dialogue between the prince Arjuna and the god Krishna, who is the avatar of Vishnu after Rama. And Arjuna is filled with doubt and moral dilemma about fighting in a war, since the opposing side is his family and friends. And Krishna imparts knowledge, his advice, discussing key concepts like dharma, duty, righteousness, and the passive devotion, bhakti, and knowledge, and disciplined actions. And it's important of like doing one's duty without attachment to the results. And it's full of like life affirmation. And it's just like a verse by verse commentary over the entire thing. Oops. Oh gosh. Okay, I'll put that there. Let's fix that. Make sure everything's fine now. Okay, so next we have the Sri Isopanishad. I bought it from like some random guy on campus during undergrad for like $5, and it goes over like devotion or bhakti to Krishna. Next we got 2 books on Buddhism. We got the Dhammapada, and we have Gethin's Foundation of Buddhism. It's like a Buddhism 101 book, and it can provide like additional explanations of Buddhist doctrines and teachings. And I recommend the Dhammapada to anyone, or both books really, for anyone interested in Buddhism. After that, we have the Analects by Confucius. We have a book on Native American religion, the teaching spirits. Let's see, we have The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And we also have Musashi's Book of 5 Rings. And the former talks about like pragmatic military strategy and knowing oneself and the opponent and adapting to like changing circumstances. And the latter is like the philosophy of a disciplined warrior, Musashi. Oh, this was Ilham Iqbal's PhD thesis. It's really well researched, and it's it really talks about like the metaphysics, Persia, as the name suggests, and it goes in depth on like Zoroastrian theology and the philosophy of Ibn Arabi. After that, you can tell, right, what book this is? No. It's Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. And then we have First and Second Treaties of Government by John Locke. And we have the major political writings of Rousseau. Let's see, hope it stays. Malcolm X is going to keep it there. Okay. So I have like a really long blog article talking about the Enlightenment thinkers and philosophers, political philosophy, if you're interested. But I'll just do a quick rundown. And by a quick rundown, it'll probably take like 20 minutes. And starting with Thomas Hobbes, he really turned the political world like upside down on his head. Kind of like Nietzsche, we're going to talk about later with moral philosophy. But Hobbes was in favor of like government absolutism. Like according to Hobbes, human psychology is fundamentally driven by desire for pleasure and aversion from pain, and individuals have their own like pains and pleasures that can be distinct from one another, and the means to achieve one's pleasures or passions is done through reason, which is calculated by looking at the pros and cons of the method of achieving passion. However, no one feels satisfied with what they have, and they always look for more. And Hobbes argued that without civilization and government, presupposing this psychological framework of human nature, people will always use one another to maximize their passion for power. And since everyone views each other as a means to an end, they eventually become like skeptical perpetually and see everyone as a threat to one another, and they want to avoid being used. And therefore, to escape this perpetual skepticism, humans must come together and make allies while restraining their own passions and overpower over one another, and give up this freedom for peace. And yet, this group of allies will wage war with one another, and there'll be like civil war amongst allies. And to avoid this, Hobbes argued that people need to forfeit all their liberties to a government that controls people. And Hobbes believed that individuals always be biased towards themselves, and thus government needs to necessarily be in charge. So like the best form of government, probably according to Hobbes, would be an absolute monarchy. While Locke takes a completely different viewpoint on the social contract theory, but with the same like presuppositions of pain and pleasure. He agrees that this entails like instinctual, like that people need to calculate methods to achieve their own pleasure and avoid pain. And people would always like try to use others for this goal. But where he disagrees with Hobbes, Hobbes said people go like for the others' throats, but Locke says like the internal calculations of pain, pleasure, for all it's common through all individuals. So therefore, we need to treat each other as equals and be civilized. So therefore, people will not act in their self-interests, but would rather accommodate others. And he believes that, with these calculations of pleasure and pain, creating a government will be like any other calculation. And for Locke, individuals have the right to give up freedoms in forming a civilization. In nature, people have the rights of like life, liberty, health, and possessions, and they could give it up if they or let it be controlled, and if they believe it would be better protected under a government. And if the government is unable to protect these inalienable rights, quote unquote, or if the government imposes like laws against these rights, then the government would be illegitimate, and people have the right to revolt and start their own government. And this philosophy heavily influenced Thomas Jefferson when writing the Declaration of Independence, and therefore it's deeply rooted in the foundations of the United States. As for Rousseau, we have a different perspective than the previous two mentioned philosophers. He argues that the progression kind of reminds me of like the Unabomber in a way, but that's besides the point. He argues that the art and sciences corrupted humanity and human morality and nature, and that a purely intellectual culture is the antithesis of what humans ought to abide by. Like civilized, culture requires uniformity amongst its citizens, and that our basic interactions with one another are a mask of our true selves to fit a societal standard. And this rigidity will lead to hypocrisy and inhibits human nature, and therefore causes society to be immoral. And for Rousseau, before a society had established itself, man was a simple, peace-loving creature who finds food and shelter easily. Society, however, brings the unnatural competition, deceit, and aggression. But a person would not, fall into these traits if there's an abundance of goods. But once competition is introduced, an individual will attempt to gain advantage over the fellow human, kind of like what Hobbes was saying, in order to survive. And so the question then becomes, then why did people develop society if it's going to lead to competition and their downfall? And then according to Rousseau, the answer is simple: because he liked it better. Like agriculture, technology, and property are too appealing to ignore, even if it's bad for him. And as the government that Rousseau envisioned, it's like a small government. It's about the general will of the people who come together for the common good. After that, we have two books by John Stuart Mill. We have Utilitarianism, and so it's kind of like based off the ethical philosophy developed by Jeremy Bentham, which I don't have his books on me. And then we have his book on liberty. And Mill argues that the foundation of morality is the principle of utility, which states that the actions are right if they promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. And he's a big advocate for individual rights, liberalism, and colonialism. Next we have The Prince by Machiavelli. In this book, he offers pragmatic advice to rulers on how to acquire, maintain, and even consolidate power, even if the means are unethical, or that the ends justify the means. He famously advised that it's better for a ruler to be feared than loved, but not to the point of being hated, of course. And next we have the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels. And so he kind of branches off Hegel's philosophy of the dialectic, but he turns it into a material dialectic rather than concepts and But the book basically is a rallying cry for the workers to unite against the class oppression. He described history as a series of class struggles, ultimately culminating in a conflict between the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and the proletariat, the working class. And he calls for the abolition of private property, and that the means of production should be owned by the collective. After that, we have the Republic of Plato. I have a blog article dedicated to the entire book, summarizing each part of it. but briefly, it's like a dialogue between Socrates and other characters, in which he talks about like, what is justice, what's the ideal society, what is like the nature of human virtue, and he expounds on topics such as like the philosopher king as the ideal ruler, the allegory of the cave for like a metaphor of like enlightenment and ignorance, the tripartite nature of the soul, which parallels like the ideal society. After that, we have Plato's 5 dialogues. There's like Euthyphro, Apology, Credo, Meno, Phaedo, and the first one talks about what is piety, can morality be defined by divine command, and I have a blog article also refuting the Euthyphro dilemma with presupposing an Abrahamic framework. Okay, next we have I'll talk next book in that 5 dialogues. It was Apology, in Socrates' defense of philosophy as a pursuit of truth and virtue. Credo, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it talks about like the relationship between justice, law, and duty. Meno, can virtue be taught, and how do we acquire knowledge? Phaedo, like the immortality of the soul and the philosophical view of death. After that, we have Aristotle's Politics, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm guessing it's probably like Aristotle's view of what the best type of government is. After that, we have a book I bought a few days ago, History of Philosophy in the 20th Century. And it's just to see how like philosophy, progressed in these recent times. After that, we have the autobiography of Malcolm X I bought not too long ago, but I haven't started it because of medical school. Okay, I hope that stays. After that, we have more Aristotle down here. We have his Nicomachean Ethics. We have his Metaphysics as well. Let's see if I can hold the phone like this while I talk. As for his ethics, I have a blog article that explains the basic concepts of the book. But basically, for Aristotle, virtue is defined as like the mean between excess and deficiency. Like being cowardly and being like over the top, recklessness. The mean between that is being brave, and that's a virtue for Aristotle. And achieving virtue requires practical wisdom. And the ultimate goal is, I don't know how to pronounce this, but eudaimonia, or flourishing, and it's just achieved through living in accordance with reason and virtue. And the man who possesses character to do the right thing in the right time in the right way. Next we have Aristotle's Metaphysics, and we're probably gonna spend like 20 minutes talking about that as well. But I also have a blog article about it. Most of what I know about Aristotelian metaphysics is through reading Aquinas' Summa. I don't have a physical copy of the Summa since it's like really expensive, but you can find good PDFs online or on newadvent.org. And also have a refutation of Aristotelian metaphysics, or also have like a refutation of the doctrine of divine simplicity in Thomism and Neoplatonism, where I like talk about the idea of God as actus purus, or pure act. The unmoved mover itself is like the cause of all motion and change in the universe, but itself is unmoved and changed. And also Aristotle talks about concepts like substance, causality, potentiality, and actuality, all of which are crucial for understanding like the nature of being. He also discusses concepts of like the unmoved mover, like I mentioned previously. Also have a blog article talking about his hylomorphism, or that all physical objects are composed of 2 fundamental principles. We have hyle, matter, and morpha, form. According to Aristotle, matter and form cannot exist independently, rather they work together to make up substances. He also discusses universals and particulars, and contrasts that with Plato's theory of forms. And like Aristotle argues that universals exist within particulars, meaning that the general properties like redness or humanity are found within specific individual objects, but do not exist separately from them, as Plato says. Because Plato argued that universals exist like independently in a special realm, apart from the particulars. And a blog article also discussing the different views regarding like universals, such as like nominalism, for example, or conceptualism. After that, we have Marcus Aurelius, his meditations right here. That's what he looked like. And so I have also a blog article going over like a basic overview of Stoicism and Stoic metaphysics. But for them, the only good, the worth striving for is virtue, which is like a living in agreement with nature. And if one is uncomfortable with something something uncomfortable with what they can change, then they should do so. But if they're uncomfortable with something they can't control, such as like when they'll die, then there's no point of being uncomfortable with it, right? Because it goes against the order of like that's permeated by the logos, and for them like the logos is like it's a type of modism. It's like a material modism that like, permeates through everything. So therefore, one should accept the condition that they're in if they can't control it. And like the best thing is to be like in accordance with nature, and to be kind and do things that we can control. And also believe in like a soft determinism, compatibilism, which is something I also kind of believe in. I dropped my phone, so this is a new cut. So we had Plotinus, the Enneads. It's kind of hard to hold the phone and talk at the same time, at least for me, or record at the same time. But I'll just hold it here. I have another blog article going over like the basics of Neoplatonism, or just a quick overview. That like Neoplatonism revolves around the idea of like an all-powerful, transcendent divinity, the One, and it's like several emanations. The One's like an omnipotent force that exists beyond all categories, and it's a single source of light from that like the entire like universe is illuminated from. The One, however, is not the direct creator of the universe. Rather, the One represents like a higher level of divinity and reality than the demiurge, or the divine intellect, which is a creative element of the divine. And it's a manifestation of the radiance of the One, and it permeates to the lower levels of the cosmos, which are visible to man. And the One is so simple that it doesn't contain like any parts or can be divided, and it's beyond reality that one can't even say that it exists, and one can't say that it doesn't exist either. Neither exists nor doesn't exist, because it's beyond just categories. And it's like similar to like what's found in like Ismailism in the Shia tradition, which I disagree with entirely. But like the One is like the cause of reality, and has like two hypostases or substances that emanates from it, like two lesser beings, like the nous, which the nous nous, that corresponds perfectly to the One, but it's a derivative, and it's like paradoxically different. And what Plotinus understands by the nous is like the high sphere accessible to the human mind, and then the emanation after the nous is the world soul, and it stands between the nous and the phenomenal world. And the demiurge, which is part of the world soul, is the energy which manifests or organizes the material world into being perceivable, while the soul generates the world. And according to Plotinus, like the existence of imperfection requires the existence of the mutually exclusive perfection, which is the source where imperfection can be judged. And if that's the case, the imperfection flows in degrees from the source of perfection, and the flowing is the emanations that come from the One. And the goal of the individual is to reach a stage of unity with the One. And Neoplatonists had like ideas of like pre-existence and immortality of the soul and reincarnation. After that, we have the ethics of Spinoza. I haven't really read that one. I just dropped Hume. Oops. But it's too big brain for me, ethics. After that, we have a whole bunch of Nietzsche. One might see too much Nietzsche. I have the Cambridge Companion to Nietzsche. We have, here's Nietzsche. Let's look at his face. Very happy guy. We have on the genealogy of morality. We have Beyond Good and Evil. We have Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist. We have, and finally, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And the way I said that I have it ordered is probably the reading order I would also recommend, minus like the Cambridge Companion. I have a blog post summarizing like the basics of Nietzsche. But to sum it up, according to Nietzsche, the initial form of morality was set by the warrior, the aristocrats, and ruling castes of ancient civilization. And let's see what else. But whoever like this kind of like disagreed with that, like the lower like castes and classes, that's what they consider like the aristocratic values of like good and bad, like coincided like the relationship to the lower castes, and this like moral value, the things that were morally good were considered like strength and power, and he believed that those who lacked power and authority resented those who held it, so leading to like a moral inversion, and this inversion led to a society where once weak qualities became virtuous. So the attributes of strength and pride that were once originally good were deemed immoral, and this is known as the slave revolt in morality. And he believed that it was the Jews who did this, and that they were successful. So like I said, that inversion of values led to a situation where qualities that were seen once as weak became virtues, and qualities associated with strength and power, such as pride, were deemed immoral. And the inversions of values was like a negative for society and created weak people with a nihilistic outlook on life. And according to Nietzsche, the imposition of moral constraints led by society led to a sense of guilt and bad conscience in individuals who deviated from these norms. And this bad conscience can be found in religion, especially in Christianity, which claimed that humans were sinful by nature. Central Nietzsche's to his philosophy was the concept of the Übermensch, or the Overman, or Superman, an individual who rose above societal constraints, who can create their own values based on strength, creativity, and self-mastery, who represents like the continual effort to overcome obstacles that get in one's way, and the next evolution in humanity. And he believes that like other concepts, like the will to power that's inherent in humanity, and there's a lot I haven't mentioned about Nietzsche, but you can just look at my blog for that. So after Nietzsche, I have 2 books by Kierkegaard. We have Fear and Trembling, and we have Either Or. I haven't read Either Or, but I read the former. I got halfway through before school started. And so in Fear and Trembling, he uses the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac to explore the concept of the leap of faith, the idea that true faith requires people to go beyond reason and accept the paradoxes of like religious life, or religious belief rather, which kind of, I don't know. Like one sentence that really stood out for me, I don't know like it off the top of my head, but went something like that he studied and could understand the dialectics of Hegel, but to understand the dialectic of faith was like an impossible task for him. After that, we have the Cambridge Companion to Hume, and I got Hume that fell behind here. We have his inquiry to understanding, an inquiry concerning human understanding. Put that here. So I have a blog post going over the basics of Hume, but in short, the summary of his philosophy is that our ideas are derived from impressions, which are like immediate data or sensations or reflections, and we only have notions of causality, having observed things in the world, because one thing causes another, right? But according to Hume, this causality is rather simply noticing like the immediate succession of one thing after another. Like when we see that the sun rises, we can only assume that it rises tomorrow. There's nothing necessary that, in fact, that it will just because we've seen it a billion times. And how can an individual be sure something is caused by another by simply observing it happen? That's only induction, not causality. Matter of facts are only experienced through experience or a posteriori. That's in contrast with like relations of ideas, which are known a priori and are necessary true like mathematical truths. But pure reason only goes so far that it can't discover anything synthetic a priori about the external world, according to Hume. But Kant, as we discussed earlier, flips that idea on its head. And one can think about like the number 1 and the number 2 and observe that when we add those together, we get the value of 3, but that didn't really reveal anything new about the external world. nothing synthetic. And even if we manage to demonstrate something occurring a million times, it doesn't matter because it only takes one instance to provide a single counterexample to disprove it. Therefore, induction is never determinate. We can, at most say that perhaps something has a high probability of happening, but even making generalizations involves induction, therefore it's indeterminate. And lastly, in my philosophical section, we have Descartes, the first philosophy book I ever read, Meditations on First Philosophy. And also, he's kind of like the opposite of David Hume in a way. And so I guess you could say that the thesis is Descartes, the antithesis is Hume, and the synthesis is Kant, if you're trying to talk like Hegel, I guess. And I have a blog article explaining the basics of Descartes' philosophy, but in short, Descartes aims to doubt anything that could be doubted. The idea is to strip away all beliefs that can be based on faulty reasoning or unreliable senses, in order to arrive at a foundation of knowledge that's certain and can't be doubted. He doubts things like the physical world, his imagination, even mathematics, because it could be an evil demon that's telling him that 2 + 2 is 4. And but Descartes concludes that despite all these errors with sense, reason, reality, math, as long as there's a first-person experience that he thinks, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum in Latin, think therefore I am. So as long as someone is thinking they exist, I think it was Ibn Sina that says just existence. So he kind of goes a step prior, or more fundamental step. But eventually Descartes makes a perfect being ontological argument for the existence of a benevolent God, and because of that, he's able to trust the senses again. So the final portion of the library is going to be going over the books I have about Christianity. So now we move on to the final section of my library, Christianity. Starting with, we have History of the Bible by John Barton. It's a decent introduction to biblical studies. It goes over every part of the Bible, starting with the Old Testament, such as its history, teachings, the development, and it also talks about the New Testament, Christian Bible. We're also discussing the manuscript tradition. He talks about themes of the Bible, reception, readings, rabbis, church fathers. Next, we have 2 books by James L. Kugel. We have How to Read the Bible, A Guide to Scripture Then and Now, and the Bible as It Was. And let's see. I haven't read the former, but based off the description, it goes over how ancient interpreters understood key passages of the entire Old Testament or Jewish Bible, and compares it to what modern scholarship tells us about the origins and accuracy of the text. And I'll just show the table of contents since I haven't read it. I'll just flip through it. You can see just how the book is, what it talks about. And the table of contents itself, there's a couple maps. That highlighting is not mine, but table of contents is the first page. After that, we have the Bible as It Was, also by Kugel, and this is something I did read. And this goes over just different commentaries, interpretations of famous stories in the Bible, Hebrew Bible. Like the cover, it's read this cover to cover. It's quite a thick book. The pages as well, it's interesting texture. You see highlighting, just those sort of Jacob and the angel, have Abraham. More Abraham. Let's see. Just different interpretations and commentaries about it. About the story of Noah. Yeah. After that, we have another book by John Barton right here, down here. Okay. The Word, How We Translate the Bible and why it matters. I really enjoyed this book. It goes over the history of biblical translations, such as and also bringing the Bible to the reader versus taking the reader to the Bible, and the style and register of translations, inclusive language, and biblical textual criticism. After that, I said, I have too much Nietzsche. I have too much Bart Ehrman. I think I have 11 books in total by him. So starting off with Jesus Interrupted, Bart Ehrman discusses there's several contradictions in the Bible and the New Testament, and it talks about like the biblical narratives, the different views of the authors, who wrote the Bible itself, and how the canon of the Bible was developed, and it's like a common theme amongst Barterman's books. After that, we have two books that go hand in hand: Lost Christianities and Lost Scriptures. The former is on the topic of different heterodox groups in early Christianity. I guess at that time they wouldn't call them heterodox, since the Orthodox wasn't established at that time. There's proto-Orthodox. It also talks about the different non-canonical writings and forgeries by both the proto-Orthodox and heterodox, and also how the biblical canon was developed. Lost Scriptures, on the other hand, is just a compilation of all the apocryphal Christian texts. I'll show the table of contents. Let's see, after that, what do we have? After that, we have, it's hard to read like the red with the yellow, Forge. It goes into like the historicity, or like a lack of it. Also talks about like the authors of the New Testament, and that the books of the New Testament are forgeries, and the names of the authors were later given. And I'm talking to my Christian audience here, that it's important to note that Dr. Ehrman's approach is academic and rooted in historical analysis, and that doesn't necessarily challenge like the spiritual value or truth of the Bible for believers. But like even many scholars who even have faith engage with these historical questions to better understand the context of which the Bible is written, such as like the late Dale B. Martin. But like this book is just like one perspective on like how texts from early Christianity and the early Christian era came to be. It's not meant to diminish the importance or meaning of these texts and like what they hold for people of faith. And but it kind of goes for all the historical Jesus books that I will mention later as well. But I'm just gonna say, in the world of academia, Dr. Ehrman isn't presenting like groundbreaking ideas. Like what he talks about is like well-established facts based on the historical methods. And also have like a blog article like dedicated to like the synoptic problem, for example, and like possible solutions provided by scholars. And the synoptic problem, for those who don't know, refers to the question how like the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are interrelated, and like giving their like striking similarities in content structure and even like precise wording, but also significant differences despite being like written at like different times and different locations. Like over 3/4 of Mark's content is found both in Matthew and Luke, and 97% of Mark is found in at least one other two synoptic gospels, and like 23% of like Matthew and 23% of Luke have a common material that's not found in Mark. While there's no conclusive like solution that has been found, the vast majority, like 99% of like New Testament scholars, favor that Matthew and Luke use the Gospel of Mark as a source, and as Matthew and Luke, what they have in common draws from like a hypothetical additional source document called the Q source, or that's Q for Quelle, which means source in German, and that's just the content that Matthew and Luke have in common. After that, we have the Triumph of Christianity by Dr. Ehrman, and it goes over how like the religion took over the Roman Empire and how it spread around the world. After that, we have Armageddon by Bart Ehrman, and it goes over the historical interpretations of what early Christians would have thought of when they're reading the book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament. And it talks about like in terms of symbolism that early Christian would see, rather than it being like a book of prophecies of the end times. But the symbolism really goes with how the early Christians would review like the Roman Empire and like different emperors. After that, we have just different versions of the Bible. We have the ESV, we have the NIV, we have ESV but British, bought in England. So we have another ESV. We have two new King James versions, but this one's like the red letter edition. But just like it's interesting after reading the John Barton book, it's interesting to see how different people translate biblical verses, and I like to compare when they're translated. And after reading Ehrman, I like to see who puts the footnotes to the longer ending of Mark and the Johannine comma, who includes it. Up top here we have Didache, right? And it's one of like the earliest Christian texts outside the New Testament, and it's believed to be written like the late 1st or early 2nd century, and it provides like insight into practices, beliefs, and ethical teachings of early, probably within Christian community church. It also covers topics such as like baptism, fasting, prayer, the Eucharist, along with moral guidelines for like how Christians should live their lives. After that, we have Zealots by Reza Aslan. Put the Didache down. And he argues that Jesus was not, or Isa alayhi salam, was just not a spiritual leader, but also like a political revolutionary who sought to challenge the Roman Empire and establish like a religious order of his time. And also that his life and teachings were deeply influenced by the turbulent and social climate of the 21st century Judea. So he's basically a member of the Zealot movement. He's like trying to overthrow the Roman rule through radical resistance by completely disagreeing with his interpretation of the historical Jesus, but I appreciate what he was trying to do with it. After that, we have The Historical Figure of Jesus by E.P. Sanders. And it's a well-regarded work in the field of the historical Jesus studies. Sanders, a leading scholar of early Christianity, provides like a thorough scholarly examination of the historical context of Jesus' life and ministry, and he like seeks to reconstruct the historical figure of Jesus by separating the theological interpretations from the historical evidence that's available. Like Jesus as a religious reformer and an apocalyptic prophet who's concerned with issues like the kingdom of God, the poor, and the coming of the end age. After that, we got more Bart Ehrman, if you started to miss him. We have Misquoting Jesus. Here, Dr. Ehrman discusses how Christian scriptures developed, how manuscripts were made, differences between manuscripts, whether that be through copyist errors or theologically motivated reasons like the Johannine comma or the longer ending of Mark or the story of the adulterous woman, like neither found in the earliest manuscripts we have. And also goes over the historical critical method. After that, we have How Jesus Became God by also Dr. Ehrman. And don't worry, it's only like 3 more books by Ehrman after this one. Pretty liberal in terms of this New Testament scholarship. But I don't think that conservative Christian would agree with like anything he says. But that's just like a part of the divide between like the historical method and like a theological method. But so he discusses like in that book, he discusses like divine humans in ancient Greece, Rome, and ancient Judaism, and like whether the historical Jesus himself thought he was God or not, and what we can know and can't know about the resurrection, and different Christologies of the New Testament found in each gospel and in the Pauline letters. And then Ehrman then traces the historical development of Christian doctrine leading up to the Council of Nicaea, where various Christological views were debated and solidified. And on my blog, I have an article dedicated to Logos Theology found in the Gospel of John, if anyone's interested. After that, we have The Quest for the Historical Jesus by Albert Schweitzer. I think I'm saying the name right. I haven't finished it yet, but it's like super dense and like the writing's so small you need a magnifying glass for. But he goes over and analyzes and critiques different views of the historical Jesus from the 18th and 19th century and how it evolves. He argues that interpretation of Jesus is shaped by the basis and assumptions of the scholars of his time. And like Schweitzer emphasizes that the historical figure of Jesus, as portrayed by these quests, often reflect ideals and concerns of interpreters themselves rather than the historical Jesus. He also like introduces his own understanding of Jesus as a apocalyptic prophet who believed in like the end of the world was imminent. After that, we have The Metaphor of the God Incarnate by I think it's Jonathan Hick. Yeah. He argues against the traditional Christian understanding that Jesus was God incarnate who died for the sins of the world and founded the church to proclaim this. Rather, he argues that the incarnation was better understood as a metaphor, as Jesus was the one who made God real to us, rather than being God amongst us in a literal sense. And he really goes in depth on the idea of atonement through blood and its understanding throughout history, and attempts to prove an alternate meaning to it. He also discusses a bit of metaphysics in incarnation as well, in terms of like if it's logical or not. Next we have the late Dale B. Martin. It's basically New Testament literature, history and literature, and it's all his lectures given at Yale University in one book. I really recommend this book to anyone, and the book next to it, another Ehrman book, to anyone who's interested in the in studying the New Testament in terms of its history. And I'll show the table of contents and to zoom out. There we go. You can see it more behind. There we go. Yeah. Try to read as fast as you can, right? After that, we have on New Testament, the New Testament historical introduction to the early Christian writings by Ehrman. This is the textbook used at USF. And also here, it kind of goes with it, is a New Testament, a translation by Ehrman. And also it includes like other writings, such as like the Shepherd of Hermas, or the Gospel of Thomas, and the letters of Ignatius and Clement. And I'll show you the table of contents for this book as well. That's the brief contents. If you can see it. You don't gotta zoom in that much. Can you zoom out? Thank you. Okay, put that back. Next we have the last Bart Ehrman book that I own, The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture. And the book basically kind of goes what we're talking about a bit earlier with his other books. This is one of his more scholarly works. He explores like how early Christian texts were altered to support the Orthodox or proto-Orthodox theological views. And as Christianity became more institutionalized and certain doctrines began to solidify, scribes intentionally modified biblical texts to promote these Orthodox beliefs and to suppress alternative interpretations. And Bart Ehrman provides like several detailed analyses of specific textual variants throughout the New Testament. After that, we have the Confessions of St. Augustine, or St. Augustine, however you want to pronounce it. And it should be down there with like the other books I have of Augustine, but I haven't finished it either. But it's like deeply like a personal and philosophical work where Augustine discusses his own journey from a life of indulgence and confusion to his eventual conversion to Christianity, and the events and decisions that shaped his life, and his inner struggles with faith and sin, and the transformative power of God's grace. Now we're going to move to the bottom row, so let's just take a break. Okay, so bottom row now, we have the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I use it more as an encyclopedia and reference book for Christianity for my blog articles. After that, we have Realism and Nominalism revisited by Henry Viac, where he tried to refute nominalism or the idea that there's no such thing as universals, or that they're just like categories that we assign to one another, or things to group them. After that, we have Reflections of the Existence of God by Simmons, and he tries to refute the problem of evil and provide an argument for the truthfulness of Christianity. After that, we have 4 more books on the historical Jesus, so I should probably have them up here, but it's okay. And so starting off, we have 2 books by James Tabor, Paul and Jesus, and the Jesus Dynasty. And so in the former book, James Tabor argues that the understanding of Paul's role in development of Christianity is crucial to understand the evolution of Christian theology and the transformation in the message of Jesus. Like, he dwells into like the historical context of both figures and offers like a detailed look of how Paul's teachings differed from, and at times extremely departed from, the message of Jesus as understood by his disciples, particularly James, the brother of Jesus. And Tabor also examines life and teachings of Jesus and compares them with Paul's writings, and argues that Paul's like a reinterpretation of Jesus' message, particularly his divinity, atonement, and role as the Messiah, was a pivotal in the formation of Christian theology. He also has a different interpretation on how Paul views like the resurrection of Jesus and the human resurrection during the eschaton as well. For human resurrection seems more of like a spiritual thing rather than a physical one, and he argues that the idea of Jesus' resurrection was signified as a revival of that the revival, like the flesh corpse, blood corpse, like wounds and all, was like a later apologetic development, and rather it was like a resurrection of the heavenly Christ, like what Paul saw in his vision, allegedly. After that, we have the Jesus Dynasty, where Tabor investigates like the historical, archaeological evidence surrounding the life of Jesus and his family, and presents like a narrative that challenges the traditional views about Jesus, his identity, mission, and mother. And he also delves into the historical context of first century Judaism and offers a new perspective onto the relationship that Jesus had with his family and early Christian leaders. And the book also examines the role of James, the brother of Jesus, and his leadership in the early Christian movement. Similar to the next book, we have The Brother of Jesus and the Lost Teachings of Christianity by Butz, where he explores like the life of James and argues that James played a much more significant role in the early Christian movement than traditionally acknowledged. And he suggests that James, as the leader of the Jerusalem church, was the true successor, and his teachings focused on the more Jewish traditions and more direct, unmediated connection with God, but that was later overshadowed by Paul's reinterpretation of Christianity. And Butz delves into the historical texts and early Christian writings, including the Gospel of Thomas and other early Christian writings, to uncover what he believes were the original teachings of Jesus and his followers, which were lost or suppressed by later Christian orthodoxy. After that, we have another famous historical Jesus book, The Authentic Gospel of Jesus by Giza Vermes, a renowned expert in Jewish studies and historical Jesus. He explores the idea that Jesus was primarily a Jewish preacher and a reformer whose message was focused on the kingdom of God, repentance, and moral renewal within the framework of Jewish law. And he goes into over several passages in the New Testament and their interpretation from a historical perspective, and I really enjoyed reading it. And on my blog, I wrote my own essay on the historical Jesus, using most all the previous sources we've talked about so far. And it's a bit long, over 20 pages, and hopefully you can check it out. After that, we have the Islamic Jesus by Mustafa Akyol, I think that's his name. And I haven't read it yet, but just looking at these historical Jesus books thus far, they argued against that Jesus taught himself as God. Rather, he taught himself as a messianic prophet who confirmed the Torah and taught about the kingdom of God, and didn't think of himself as a part of the Trinity or incarnation. And that's pretty much what Islam claims about him anyways. After that, we have the Nag Hammadi scriptures. I'll show the table of contents for that. up here for now. But if you don't know, like the Nag Hammadi library was like written in Coptic. It includes like early Christian and Gnostic writings that were like unknown or lost to history, but recently discovered. I think like the 1950s or something like that. So pretty recent. And these texts date back to like the 3rd and 4th centuries and contain like a range of works, including gospels, letters, and apocryphal writings. And some well-known texts from the collection include like the Gospel of Thomas, which might date even to the 1st century. Also has like the Gospel of Philip and the Apocrypha of John. And basically the library provides like important insight into Gnosticism, like a religious and philosophical movement that emerged in the early centuries that Irenaeus, that we're going to talk about later, in his against heresies that he tries to refute. But for Gnostics, they emphasize like secret knowledge or gnosis as the key to salvation, in contrast to the Orthodox teaching that he said to focus on faith in Jesus Christ. And they also believe that the world was created by a lesser divinity called the demiurge. It's kind of what you saw in Neoplatonism that we went over earlier. That the true God was descendant and beyond the physical realm. And salvation for Gnostics was achieved through awakening this hidden knowledge and realizing the divine spark, like that first Transformer movie, I don't know, which would ultimately escape will allow them to escape the material world. And I have a blog article which goes over the basics of Gnostic theology, as there are like many different versions of it. After that, we have some books on the Trinity, as you can see. First, we have this one, which is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on the Trinity by Dale Tuggy, but in a book form. And it's detailed scholarly examination on the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. And the Trinity is the central doctrine of Christianity, belief that God exists as 3 persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but in one essence. And this doctrine is fundamental to most branches of Christianity, but it's been like a subject of much theological debate and interpretation throughout history. And the book covers like the historical development of the Trinity, beginning with its early biblical roots in the New Testament, arguably, and tracing its evolution through like the early church councils, particularly the Council of Nicaea in 325. And it explores the philosophical and theological challenges posed by the doctrine, especially the question of how 3 distinct beings, co-equal, co-eternal, but each are God. They're not each other, but there's only one God. And also develops into different various theological models, interpretations that have been proposed by Christian thinkers from the early church and contemporary scholars to support the Trinity against the 3-ness, oneness problem, or the tritheism objection. And also talks about the subordinationism, Arianism, social Trinitarianism, and relative identity Trinitarianism. And after that, we have another book by Dale Tuggy, What is the Trinity, right here. And I read it like a long time ago, so I don't really remember like much of it. But from what I do know, it went over like the Trinity, how different early church fathers viewed it, per se. I don't know if that's the right word for it. But it also talks about the different ecumenical councils and whether the Trinity makes any logical sense. And considering that Dale Tuggy is a Unitarian, I think I'll tell you enough what his answer might be to that question. After that, we have the Trinity by Davis, Kendall, and O'Collins. O'Collins also wrote this book here we'll talk about next. And basically the book is a series of scholarly articles that go over arguments in support of the Trinity from a logical and metaphysical perspective, and whether social models or the historical models or any other models. Probably my favorite essay is Anti-Social Trinitarianism by Brian Lefdow, and I have a blog article discussing it. After that, we have Christology by Gerald Collins, and I really enjoy this book as well. It's really in-depth and covers a lot of topics relating to Christology, such as the resurrection, the title of Son of Man and its meanings throughout history, the title of Son of God and its meaning throughout history, how the early church fathers viewed the incarnation, how the ecumenical councils shaped the doctrine of the incarnation, and what is orthodox versus heterodox, and the significance of the crucifixion and vicarious atonement. I just really like the historical part of it, the historical development of the doctrine, like reading about that. And then the last portion of my library is the Church Fathers. First, we have an overview of them by Pope Benedict XVI. just goes over the lives of the early church fathers and their that's pretty much it. And this goes all the way from like Clement of Rome to Saint Augustine. And after that, we have the writings of Justin Martyr. We have his dialogue with Trypho and his first and second apology. The dialogue of Trypho just argues that Jesus is the Messiah foretold in the Hebrew scriptures, and Christianity is the true continuation fulfillment of Judaism. And he's arguing with the character named Trypho the Jew, whether if it's a real conversation or not that relevant to the book, but just the message of it. And he uses passages from the Hebrew Bible to support his claims, focusing on like prophecies of Christ, probably like the ones like given in Matthew. It's been a while since I read it. So it talks about like the new covenant and like interpretation of the law. And Justin expounds on early Logos Christianity and subordinationism, which is kind of influenced by his Platonic background. And I would argue that all ante-Nicene church fathers argue from a form of subordinationism. And also, I think it's interesting that he quotes the Gospels, but he never calls them by their name. At most, he calls them the memoirs of the apostles. He never calls them Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. I guess the names weren't given then. I think the first person to ever call them by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was Irenaeus. And then in his first and second apologies, Justin defends Christianity against Roman persecution and misconceptions, and appeals to the Roman emperors and the Senate, and argues against accusations of atheism and immorality. After that, we have the Diatessaron by Tatian, a student of Justin Martyr. It's all the four Gospels synthesized into one continuous account, removing duplications and preserving the core teachings and events of Jesus' life. And according to Tatian, the only contradiction that he couldn't figure out, or he couldn't like flesh together into one thing, was the discrepancies between the genealogies given in Matthew and Luke. But the Diatessaron was widely used in early Christian communities, especially in like Syria, before the Gospels were established as like standard texts. After that, we have against heresies by Irenaeus. I haven't read the entire thing, it's super dense, but he critiques like the Gnostic beliefs and defends proto-Orthodox Christian theology. It's a 5-book work, and refuting different Gnostic sects, particularly their cosmologies and their view of like the material world is evil and their rejection of the Hebrew scriptures. After that, I have some works by Tertullian, 2 works against Hermogenes and against Praxeus, I think that's how you say it. Let's see if I can put it back. And the first work, and against Hermogenes, it's like a polemic against Hermogenes, a Christian thinker who proposed that God created the world from pre-existing eternal matter rather than ex nihilo, out of nothing. And then he defends the Christian doctrine of creation, arguing that God is alone and eternal, and that matter must be created by him. And also we have against Praxeus, his polemic against the teachings of Praxeus, who advocated for modalism, or the belief that God is a single person who manifests into 3 modes, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, rather than 3 distinct persons. And he uses, I would still say that Tertullian was a subordinationalist, and even though he used the first person, he used the word Trinity or Trinitas in Latin. And if you don't believe me, I have like 2 blog articles arguing that all the ante-Nicene church fathers believed in subordinationalism, and have quotes from their writings to prove it. After that, we have the History of the Church by Eusebius. It's the first comprehensive account of Christian history, chronicling like the development of the church from the time of Christ to Eusebius' own era. The work covers the lives of the apostles, the spread of Christianity, the persecution under various Roman emperors and martyrs, the triumph of Christianity with Constantine's rise to power. After that, we have some books by Athanasius. We have against the heathens. We have against defense against the Arians. And we have on the incarnation. Against the heathens is just like him dunking on the Roman gods. like a defense against the Arians, Athanasius defends like the Orthodox Christian belief in the full divinity of Jesus Christ against the teaching of Arius, who argued that the Son was created by the Father and therefore subordinate to him. And Athanasius obviously strongly rejects Arianism and asserts that the Son is homoousion with the Father, fully divine, fully eternal, without beginning or end or created. And that was kind of like the whole purpose of the Council of Nicaea, First Ecumenical Council. And next book was on the Incarnation, where Athanasius explains like the metaphysics of the doctrine of the Incarnation, how the eternal Word, the Logos, became flesh in the person of Jesus Christ. And he argues that the Incarnation was necessary for salvation of humanity because God himself could restore humanity to himself after the fall, so that death could be defeated rather than Jesus dying from the sins of humanity. So it's like a later development. And there's like quotes like, "For he was made man, so that we would be made God." So a lot of divinization. Interestingly enough, like in the book, he kind of leads towards Apollinarianism, because like he talks about the body of Christ's incarnation, but he never talks about the mind or spirit. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. After that, we have On the Trinity by Saint Hilary, and it's kind of the first comprehensive outline of what is and isn't the Trinity, and he wrote it while in exile, and has like a negative view on reason, which is due to the pushback against Arianism, and has a high view of mystery of the Trinity. And the book is really repetitive, but he expounds upon the doctrine of the Trinity and how the Son is begotten before time, and has the same divinity as the Father, but still a mystery, how there's one God. And he refutes Arianism, modalism as well, and he quotes the scriptures a lot for these purposes. And after we De Trinitate by Augustine. I got like a third through it. You can see my bookmark. Maybe like a quarter-ish, I don't know. But school started, so I couldn't finish it. But it explores like the mystery of the doctrine of the Trinity, God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and he addresses the complexities of Trinitarian nature of God. And he just draws from both scripture and philosophical reasoning to understand how God could be one in essence while existing in three distinct persons. And I also believe that he was like the first person to call the Trinity as a concrete thing rather than shorthand for the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. After that, we have another classic, The City of God by St. Augustine. I haven't read it. It's quite a thick book, super long. But what I know about it, Augustine addresses the decline of the Roman Empire and offering the Christian perspective on history, politics, and the relationship between the earthly and divine realm. And in response to critics who blamed Christianity for the fall of the Roman Empire, Augustine argues that the true city of God is a spiritual realm established by God, in contrast to the city of man, which is marked by earthly concerns, pride, and sin. And he examines that the history of the Roman Empire, how the pagan gods failed to protect it, and that Christianity would offer a more solid foundation of hope and justice. After that, we have the Cambridge Companion to Aquinas. I wrote a lot about Aquinas on my blog, you can check that out. And we have on being in essence. He explores like being essence, essentia. Excuse my Latin pronunciations. But those two terms are essential for understanding metaphysics and the nature of reality. And he explores like the relationship between what is something, its essence, and that it is its existence, and argues that essence and the existence are distinct but inseparable and created beings. While essence refers to the whatness of a thing and its nature or defining characteristics, existence refers to the fact that it exists. But however, in God, essence and existence are identical, as God is actus purus, or pure active being, which he derives from Aristotle. Because at that time, if you reject Aristotelian metaphysics, it's basically saying that your religion isn't logical. But the point is that God doesn't require an external cause for his existence, as his being is identical to his existence. And the last book I have is The Triads by Gregory of Palamas. Nice haircut. but it's a cornerstone in the Eastern Orthodox theology, and he defends the Orthodox doctrine of the distinction between God's essence and energy, which is kind of similar to what we authorities believe, that the attributes of God are not identical to him, nor other than him. But yeah, that's pretty much my library. Well, thank you for watching my library tour. I know I said it'd be quick, but it ended up taking 2.5 hours or so. But as long as it was full of useful information, I think it was worth it. And I'll probably make a part 2 of this in maybe like 15, 20 years after I buy like 300 more books. So, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the video. Thank you.